Okay, so this is all about selection statements. Okay, conditional statements. So we have loops, ifs, and switches. Okay, that's the main things we're going to be covering here. Okay, so the first one here is, I can't remember which exam objective it is. So exam objective, I don't know which one it is. So it's use and if statement. All right. So we should get through this chapter fairly quickly, because there isn't anything really that new in it. Now, we go to the example file, and we are going to go static void ex1. So we're going to do a simple if statement. Int age is equal to 5. So if age is less than or equal to 18, or greater than or equal to 18, you are an adult. Else if age is greater than 12, you are a teenager. Else you are a child. Okay, so I'll just type a little bit about them here. The order is if, else, if, else. Okay. If you have only one line of code after an if, else, or else if, you do not have to have curly brackets. Okay, notice here the else, right? So I have decided to put curly brackets in here. That's the finish of the if. This is the finish of the else if. And here this is the finish of else. Okay. The if and else if always has opening and closing braces after it. Okay, those guys. Okay, so you always have opening closing braces. Just give me a second to get my pen working again. Okay, so you always have those braces after an if. You always have those braces after an else if. You never have braces after an else.
But again.
No. If I did this, it doesn't make sense to do that. It doesn't make sense.
What need brackets is like curly brackets.
Color brackets, yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, I know that you can. Yeah. Well, if you have more than one line of code, you have to put curly brackets in it. Okay. So if you've only one line of code after an if, else, or else if, you do not have to have curly brackets. Okay. So don't have to have curly brackets here for any. Now, me personally, I always do try to put curly brackets in it. It's just a personal thing. Okay, so it's totally up to yourself if you don't want to put in curly brackets for a single line of code. Alright, it's just a personal preference. I prefer it. In actual fact, when you're learning coding as well, you're probably better to put in curly brackets. Alright? So now, so what goes in the braces? What goes in the braces is a boolean. Okay, so now it's usually going to be a check. So you should know by now that when you're doing some sort of comparison, what's produced from that is either true or false. Okay, so if that's true, do that. If that's not true, won't do that. If that's true, do that. If it's false, won't do that. You understand that? Okay, that's all that's happening. Now the else is the default case. Simple as that. Okay?
Well, it's again about curly brackets, okay? Or else.
Yeah.
If I do put curly brackets, I know it's everything okay, but like
Yeah.
it will not show for my future employer when I'm like novice or something.
No.
No.
It's just a personal preference. Okay?
Sorry.
No, it's just a personal preference. Okay? So, you can put it in. Now, when you have that, by the way, remember that that is not part of the else anymore. Do you understand that? If I put curly brackets in here, that means that that is no longer part of the else. Yeah? Okay? But I'm going to leave it in as part of the else, so I'm going to take out the curly brackets. So, you can put in curly brackets here.
Would you get an error?
Nope.
You would just go on automatically.
Yep.
So you could have, you didn't have to.
Yeah. Which is what we're going to be doing later on. So we're going to be having ifs without elses. We're going to have ifs without else ifs. And we just have an if all by itself. They're all fine. Okay? So what goes in the braces is a boolean. So if that is true, do the code. If that's not true, that means that it goes down to here. So if it's not greater than or equal to 18, that means it has to be less than 18. Do you understand that? So I'll say that again. So if the age is greater than or equal to 18, that means none of the rest of it's going to implement. Yeah? So if the age is not 18 or older, that means it has to be younger than 18. That means the person has to be younger than 18. Okay? So if that's false, it's going to go down to the else. Okay? So this will get everyone between the ages of 17 and 13 inclusive. So 17 and 13. If someone is 12, it will not trigger that. Okay? Because it has to be greater than 12. Alright? If they're not older than 12, that means that's not implemented. So that means if they're not older than, not 18 or older, if they're not older than 12, that means they're a child. Okay? So else is the default case. Put it in here. So else is the default case. Simple as that. Now, so I'm going to define a weight is equal to 14.5 son. Now, if I do this, if weight greater than 20, curly bracket, you are heavy, Now, I'm not going to put in an else. I'm not going to put in an else if. So what happens here is you can have an if statement all by itself. This will only trigger if the weight is greater than 20. Okay? So if the weight is greater than 20, it will print off you are heavy. If the weight is not greater than 20, that won't print off at all. Prove it. Print it out. You are a child. It's not printing out that at all. Okay? So you can have an if statement by itself. Right? If you don't want any code to run after it, just don't put in an else, don't put in an else if. So this code will only trigger if the person is greater than, weight is greater than 20. Now it triggers. Okay? So the important thing about an if statement is an if statement does not have to have an else or an else if. So an if statement does not have to have a else if or an else. It doesn't have to have it. Okay? So it's perfectly valid just to have an if statement all by itself. Yeah, which is what I'm going to do now. So if we go if statement finishes here. Now, one good thing about curly brackets, so you could rewrite this like this. Okay, that's perfectly valid. Now, the good thing about curly brackets is it's easier to see where things finish. Okay, it's too easy to have this done. Right? And you could have a couple of hundred lines of code after it. So it might be hard enough to see what belongs to an if statement at times. Now, indenting helps. What really helps is these lads. Right? So it's totally up to yourself if you want to use curly brackets for. A lot of coders don't use them. I don't know why, but it makes code harder to read. There's no doubt about that. Huh? Right. Without brackets?
It's the fact that you need the brackets when you have multiple statements.
Yeah.
But then trace that is kind of.
Yeah.
You want to do it before double.
Sorry?
You want to do it before double. So it's actually, I want to where I need to put double. Before double.
Where?
Code brackets.
Oh, well, I mean, if you put it inside.
I know.
Yeah, if you put it inside there, then it's part of the if statement. If anything that's any variable that's declared inside here, it's a local variable. If I declare a variable inside here, that means that that variable is only available inside the if statement. Not available outside anywhere else.
But if you do not put to the available?
No. If I come along here and if I declare a variable, that variable is only available inside here. From here.
But if you remove this, I know you can't remove this.
Remove what?
Curly brackets.
Oh no, then that's then it's just if I do that.
Not just.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's just all that happens then. That's just.
You said you can also go in one line. Can you remove seesaw?
Oh well. No. That's not the problem. It's just no. That's a different problem. Okay, that's a different problem. Now sys out is part of the if. Sys out is not part of the if there. Okay. So my advice to you is use brackets. Simple as that. Okay. Just a person. Yeah.
So you had it there, no, just coming out with the
Yeah.
statement, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no brackets, I say that, does that affect the, let's say, the access and visibility?
Right. So int num is available everywhere inside ex1 from that point onwards. So I have it outside of the if statement. That means you just check what brackets. So this is the closing bracket of ex1. Okay, that means that int num is available everywhere within ex num from this point onwards. Alright, so the access, it's local to ex1 from that point onwards.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm saying, say if you put in column number 2,
Yeah.
but that immediately after the if statement,
Yeah,
without the brackets.
but without the brackets.
Without the brackets.
Okay.
Is that still, is it num then the local variable and can't be accessed?
No,
Or
so
does the brackets have
so,
the brackets?
Zero.
no, so hold on. So if weight is greater than 20, and then I put int num 2.
At the first line, you can pick
Oh.
out the system, go to the system.
Okay, take out system, right?
Just put in number 2, in number 2,
Int num 2 is equal to 45.
Is in number 2, is that local or not?
No, well you can't do that.
It's error.
Yeah, no, but no. You can't do it. You can't do that. If you have one line of code, one thing you can't do if it's just one line of code is declare a variable. That's one thing you can't do. Now, but what you can do is if you have it inside curly brackets, then it works.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
Okay.
I didn't know it's by default.
Because what
it's
you're-
a local variable.
Yeah.
It's a curly brackets.
It's curly brackets.
Local variable.
Yeah, because if you do that, what you're saying is if the weight is greater than 20, create a number. It's not doing anything else. It's not doing anything with the number. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because if you have it in curly brackets, that means there's potential you can do something with the number.
Would you like to do something somewhere later?
Yeah.
You use that number.
Oh, but you can't use once it's there. You can only use it inside there. All right. I mean, the reasoning behind this is so the one thing you can't do if you've only one line of code after an if statement or after a loop or whatever is declare a variable.
You definitely can't do that.
Yes, because you can't do anything with it. Okay. Num2, you cannot do anything with it. So it doesn't make sense to do that. Alright? So that's one thing you cannot do. So I'll just leave that in. One thing you cannot do if you only have one line of code after an if statement is declare a local variable. Okay, so you can't do that if you have no brackets, and this is just this line of code here. This is just a line of code. It's not in the if statement. Okay, so that would generate an error. So this is the one line of code. Okay, now comments, remember comments don't count. Okay, so that belongs to that if. Now, I personally think that is easier read than that, or even that. You could be going along, and remember this is Eclipse, so Eclipse is going to automatically indent things. The chances are you're going to be sometimes, if you're working in a real world environment, you're going to have to be sometime to be out in the field, literally out in the field. You find an error, you find a bug, you've got your phone, I want to fix now. What do? You load up a little text editor on your phone and you're typing out. Alright? And it's very easy to have that. Alright?
Sorry, is it a better form of X, like paid version or whatever?
No. The paid versions, no. Not for compilers, no. They're all free because it's in industry's interest to have it free.
Because 1 year ago, I was thinking only 2 years ago, so when using paid versions on but they, in that time, they choosing like Eclipse or, I'm not remember what the name was.
NetBeans.
Sorry?
NetBeans is another.
Yes, probably.
Yeah. Paid versions for these. No. Because they want as many people as possible to be coded because there is an unbelievable shortage of coders. So it doesn't. Yes, by the way, I remember a time when I worked in Microsoft back in 2005, I don't know when it was. Okay, back in the early noughties anyway. There is what's for developing in what's the package for using developing in C#? Yeah.
No, no studio was involved already.
Visual Studio. Okay. Back in 2003 or 2004, Visual Studio was 3,000 or 4,000 quid to buy. Now it's free. Okay.
So it worked from Microsoft in 90s, yes?
No, in the early noughties. Because I can remember you had the Microsoft shop and you could buy all software. No software was any dearer than $5. So you're buying so I bought all this software that was what, thousands and thousands for 30 or 40 years.
This is your fault, what this guy.
No, I wanted to come down to Galway. Dublin is fine, but it's not my home. Galway's me. So I wanted to come down. But like, actually, sorry, Visual Studio wasn't 3,000 or 4,000. It was 5,000 to buy. Now it's free. Okay.
But some paid version as well.
There is some. Well, what you can do is Visual Studio. You buy a service such as Azure. That's a different thing. Okay. Or you can buy. Let's say, hopefully we'll get to do a small bit of Android. Hopefully we'll get a bit to do Android development. What you can do is, and then you see the app that's for. You take a picture of a bottle of wine, or you put your what's it called?
This will show your rating on this.
Yeah, so it's INE. I can't remember. I don't have the app anymore. But you just put your phone up to the bottle of wine, and then it'll give you a rating of the wine, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, they didn't develop that software. They just developed the basic interface for it, and they used the Azure platform in Microsoft, and they used an AI program that Microsoft had developed themselves. So you can pay Microsoft to use the AI. That's where they're getting money. It's not from software. Okay, you're paying for services. You're not paying for the actual software itself. That's what. Okay.
But nowadays, how do people make money from apps when they're free?
Oh no, but this is a different thing. Okay, this is talking about developers. We're not talking about people making money from apps. That's a different thing. Okay, this if you want to develop, it's free. Now, Oracle are trying to enforce some payment model on Java. What they're trying to do is, if you're developing for Enterprise Edition is going to be something called Spring. It's where you're developing in Java Enterprise Edition, which is Java for large organizations. They're trying to enforce a payment on that. Now, you probably will have to pay for that, but if you're developing at that level, you're not developing for yourself, you're developing for the likes of HP, Avaya down. They're going to be huge organizations, and they can well afford payment. But if you're doing development for yourself, it's still free. Okay. Now you can pay. Ultimately, if you're going to be putting an app on the App Store, you probably would have to use something like Azure, Amazon AWS, and Google has one as well. I don't know what the Google one's called. You basically do all your development on that. And the beauty about doing your development online is that Amazon will take care of all of your security. So, and also you can just straight away you can test all of your apps on a live server. You don't have to have a server test set up yourself. Now there's different models. There's different ways you can pay for things. You can pay for it, but some of them go on the amount of traffic you have. Some of them go on the amount of commits you have to Git. That means how many times you put something onto Git. So the software itself is going to be free, but they're going to sell you a service, and that's how they make their money. That's how Microsoft is now the number one IT company in the world. That's how they make their money. It's on Azure. Alright. Now Amazon is bigger. You all know Amazon from their shops, but their number one money making package is not what you see. It's something called Amazon AWS, which is a cloud platform for where you can have everything to do with your IT on it. You can have your whole IT infrastructure on it. What do you mean by that? You there logging onto each machines. What you can do with Amazon AWS is you can just have a screen and a keyboard and a mouse. You don't need any machines. Amazon has everything on the cloud for you. So your desktop, and you can log onto this desktop anywhere in the world. Right? So rather than companies coming along and deciding we have to buy 50 PCs, we have to get a network engineer to network them all together, you just buy a service off Amazon AWS. Now it might be 2,000 or 3,000 a year. It's still cheaper than buying 50 PCs, networking them, sorting out all the issues. You're also going to have world-class encryption, the best encryption in the world, the best security in the world. You're also going to have all these apps. You're going to have all these. If you want to put something online, you can do it straight away. You don't have to set up servers yourself. You don't have to do any of that shit. Okay? So yes, that's going to cost you a couple of £1,000, but it's a lot cheaper than buying 50 PCs for your 15.
Per year or single
It's
day?
usually for per year. You can do a monthly thing, but it's cheaper to do it by year. Okay?
What is Azure?
It's the same thing as Amazon AWS. It's the Microsoft Cloud Platform. Yeah. So the top two would be Amazon would be number one. Azure would be number two. Now Azure is closely tied into. Do any of you have a legal copy of Microsoft Office? Not illegal. I know most people have an illegal copy.
I think my daughter should get like from college.
Yeah. So what they have is that's called Office 365. Now that's tied in closely to the Azure platform. Alright? It's 90 quid a year costing. Alright? So rather than once upon a time buying a disk from Microsoft, what you do is you pay Microsoft 90 quid a year and they are looking after your app constantly. They're issuing constant updates. But also I get 2 terabytes of space on OneDrive for 90 quid a year. Okay? On OneDrive, I get 2 terabytes a year for 90 quid.
Actually, only drive for 2 terabytes is actually cost more.
It's a lot dearer than what Microsoft Office used to be for me. It used to be nothing. I mean, I think everyone had a hot copy of Microsoft Office, you know? And also, this is another way for as well. They can't. It's very hard. Now, you can still get hot copies of Office 365, but you have to do a lot of bulletin to get it to work. You have to turn off your internet and all that sort of thing. For instance, another crowd that.
You pay for it once, and if you lose it, you can download it for free again. So you never lose it.
Well, there's two things you can do. You can download a version to your machine, or you can log into OneDrive and it's online on the cloud. It's like Google Docs.
And then you can renew it every year as well.
Yeah, I don't pay for it, so it's dead format. Okay, so that's closely tied into the Azure platform. All right, if you're going to do any development, really you need to have either an Amazon AWS or an Azure. The alternative is to set everything up yourself, which is expensive, and it's not going to be as good as what they do. It's as simple as that. Okay. Anyway, so one thing you cannot do if you only have one line of code after an if statement, it's declare local variable. Okay. The reason you can't is because you can't do anything with that. Okay. Reason being, you can't do anything with this local. Now, what we might just going back to the Azure thing, you know, hopefully we get to be doing projects. If we do, we might try and get someone to pay for either an Amazon account or an Azure account for all of us.
Yeah.
It'd be a good idea.
Did you create the license there?
You can actually, yeah.
Yeah. So you get so many seats.
How many?
I don't know exactly how many, but even with the Office 365 that you get, you buy it with the whole of your 5 seats.
Yeah. Well,
Probably in the education here.
I'm looking to buy, it's called LMS software, to learn management software. It's Adobe Articulate is what it's called. And if you go to buy it, it's 1,600 quid. But if you buy the education license, it's 350. So I presume there's an education license version of Azure. You saying there is?
Yeah, I remember how I would get Azure licenses to install it.
How much?
Oh, how much was it?
Yeah. And how many was in the class? Yeah, well, we'll have to look into getting that. Okay, we'll get that. It should last you a year. So even if Java 2 doesn't happen. Yeah, it's a virtual desktop. And you can have everything on it.
So we can use, we can use for 1 year. Even
yeah. And you can have everything on it. Everything.
Could maybe get more, something like this?
Now, you could even have it, let's say your television at home. You just hook up online, you have a keyboard, you know, a mouse, bring it up on your screen. You don't need a laptop. All you need is a broadband connection. Understand that? Because everything we're doing here is saved on these machines. If you have Azure, as Iggy said, everything's on the cloud.
What do you mean? But TV is supposed to be smart, anyway.
Well, if your TV can connect to the internet, then it can bring up your desktop.
But if you don't have a browser or whatever, how you can do it? It's not possible. It's to have like internet
Chromecast.
only 4 days.
Chromecast will do it. Most televisions do have a browser as well. Chromecast is the easiest way to do it. Or you log in your phone, right? And you cast. You know about casting? Most televisions in the last 5 years, made in the last 5 years, will have a casting. And what that means is, so you'd log into your Azure account on your phone, you press the cast button, and it'll appear on your television. And you can have the keyboard synced to your phone. You can have a mouse synced to your phone, and you're seeing it on television. Okay, these are all things that can be done. So all you'd need at home is a broadband connection, a keyboard, and a mouse. That's all you need. Okay, that's a lot cheaper than a laptop. So yeah, we'll have to look into getting. Iggy, if you can find any information about that, have a look. We'll be looking to get an education license for Azure, probably is the handiest one. Now that can mean as well you'll have Office 365 for a full year or so, which is very handy.
So I used to work on Sage. We used to tie up there with Microsoft as well. Office 365 license there at Sage. All your courses were completed for assembly.
Yeah.
Called Sage Business Intelligence. To work on this Microsoft.
So like, but like,
It's all
I'd imagine the ETBs should have a deal with Microsoft, I know, or Amazon, which they could probably do it. So I'll, yeah, I do. Thanks. So we look to get us those licenses for each of us.
Sorry, it's not better like Amazon. Like it's We get a zero. I don't mind.
No, but I'm just saying there's more immediate benefits for you in the likes of Azure. Number one, you've got Office. And Office is still pretty shit hot, I have to admit. And also you'll get a terabyte or two of online space. Amazon is dearer as well. So I don't know. We'll see.
But with Amazon probably will get Prime Video.
No, you won't get Prime. Prime is totally separate. No. We keep the two. We keep Amazon Shop and Amazon AWS. They're two separate entities. They don't. Okay. So we'll have a look to get neither Azure or Amazon AWS first. Now I'm not at all familiar with it either, so I'll be learning as well. So it could be a voyage of discovery for the whole lot of us. Okay. Because eventually, I mean, probably when this course is run again, it's not going to be run on these machines. It's going to be run virtually. It's going to be run on the cloud. It has to be. That's just the way software development is done. Right? Now, I have to do some talk to try and get them to do that. Jesus Christ. But it has to be done. Right. So, if you have an if statement by itself, it'll work fine. Now, so, you can have an if statement all by itself. Fine. So, put in here, if statement finishes here. Alright. Now, I don't have the curly brackets. And to me, and remember, when you're doing your code, you should be commenting your code. So you could have an if statement that has no curly bracket. And you could have 20 lines of comments. And then you have this. It's very hard to see in that situation that that belongs to that. If you have it like that, that's even harder to figure out. Alright? So it's up to yourselves. Now, I'm not going to put in the curly brackets here to show that you can have it like this. Personally, I think curly brackets makes it easier for you. Alright? Now, so I'm going to take out that guy. Right. Now, so put this in here. You can't have an else by itself. Now I'm just going to put in a line of code here. So I'm going to put in test prints. Okay, that's just going to print off test prints. Okay, now that means we're no longer belonging to this doesn't belong to the if. Yeah, so this does not belong to the if. Alright, so that means we're totally outside of the if statement's influence at this stage. Okay, now, so can't have an else by itself, so I can't do this. Get an error. Okay, the else doesn't belong to anything. An else has to belong. So I put it here. You can't have any code of any type between an if and an else. An else has to belong to an if. Okay, so this will not compile because see this code up here, that doesn't belong to anything. So we have an if statement. Our if statement finishes here. Then we have a line of code. Then we try to do an else. And what you have there, that's just an else all by itself. This is just and else all by itself, which you cannot have. Take out that line of code, take out that line of code. Okay, same rule for an else also applies to an else if. Okay, same rule for an if. Sorry, put it here. Same rule for an else also applies to an else if. Okay, it has to belong to an if, and there can be no code between it and an if or another else if or an else. Okay, so you can't have an else if by itself, will not compile. So it has to belong to something. So now you can have an if and an else. So I can say if weight is less than 15, let's say less than 15, else if weight less than 20, okay, you can have just an if and an else if. You can have just an if and an else. Now you can only have one else. Okay, but you can have multiple else ifs. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, else is the default case. Else if is all your choices.
So if you want to put else, if you want to put if weight less than 15, if weight less than 20, without else, it's working as how it is.
Yeah. Okay, you don't need an else. An else is only to provide you with the default case. In this case, we don't have a default case. So if the weight is greater than 20, it's going to print off nothing. Okay, so put it in here. If the weight is greater than 20, this will print nothing, as we have no else, which is no default case. And you know what now? That's as good a time as any to get a bit of grub. Yes, Kieran, before we...
No, if you put an else between the if and else if, I know it's not logical or
Yeah.
sensible. It essentially gives an error, does it?
Yeah. Else has to be the last one.
Yeah.
So I put that in as well, sorry. Else has to be the last one. Okay? You can't go if, else, else if. Okay? So, I'll save that. And I'll pause that. Now, so we're doing ifs. So as I've said, you can have an if all by itself. You can have an if with as many else ifs as you want. Okay. You can have an if with only one else. So I can do this if weight is greater than 20. Your 20 else weight less than 20. Okay, so you can have as many else ifs as you want. You can only have one if and one else. Yes? You understand that? Okay. Now, so what this guy here is called, this is your testing condition. Okay, so you're testing for something. If weight is greater than 20. Now, the testing condition is always either true or false. So whatever goes in here has to evaluate to either true or false. Does everyone understand that? Okay, so you can do, I'll put in the comment, whatever you put in the testing condition of an if, those guys, or if else, okay, those guys. Now, an else doesn't have opening and closing brackets, okay? It doesn't have the closing braces, the opening and closing braces. It's only an if and an if else, right? So whenever you put in the testing condition of an if or an if else, has to evaluate to a boolean. Alright, so you can't do something like this. Fuck yeah. I can't put in a print statement, for instance. Okay. If I just put in a print statement, this is not valid. Okay? Because the print statement is returning a string. Okay? That's not valid. Does everyone understand that? Yeah? So that's not valid. This is not valid. As sysout evaluates to a string. Okay? So that's not valid, so comment that guy out. Down. So I'm gonna put weight is equal to 45. Okay. Now, so I'm just assigning 45 to the double variable weight. I'm saying this for a reason. Okay. Now, if I do this, what's that doing there? What's that? Yeah, so what is it doing?
It's
Checking. Okay, so it's checking is weight 45, so that's going to evaluate to a boolean. Okay, so when you're checking for something, that's going to evaluate to true or false. Okay, so what is valid is this. So we can say if weight is equal to 45. Okay. Now, you don't, in an if statement, you very rarely use that let. Alright? You're going to be checking numbers you usually have greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Okay? You very, very rarely use that. The reason being is because there's only one circumstance amongst all the infinite numbers that exist. There's only one circumstance where this if statement will enter. It's if the weight is 45. Could be any other number in the universe. Okay? Could be from here to infinity. That's not gonna enter. So you'll find in practice you don't use the equivalence that much at all. If you're dealing with numbers, what you usually have is less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Okay? Or you even use this one, not equal to. Alright? Not equal to is going to be used a lot more than that dude. Yes? Okay? So this will evaluate to true. Okay? So we'll print out. Now, if weight is not equal to 45, okay, that also evaluates to true or false. Now, is that going to be true or false? Yeah, it's amazing how you do have to think a bit when even looking at it. Is the weight not 45? True or false? False. Okay, so you see what I mean? You have to think, alright? You can't just do it straight away. So those lads are used an awful lot more than that guy. That guy is very, very, very limited usage. Okay? That guy will be used an awful lot more. Why do you think? Why do you think that question? Why is that used an awful lot more than that?
Because the thing is true, there's only that one outcome.
Exactly. If the thing is true, there's only one outcome. This one here, that's an infinite amount of outcomes. Okay? As long as it's not 45, it's going to go there. Okay? So that has an infinite amount of outcomes. This has only got one outcome. Okay? And it's always, if you're going to search for loads of things, you're always going to use that more than something where you're only searching for one thing. That's the reason. Okay? So, put that in there. This will only evaluate to true in one circumstance. If weight is 45. This will evaluate to true in an infinite amount of circumstances as long as weight is not 45. This will evaluate. Okay? The number is not 45. Now, it won't enter in this circumstance because weight is 45. Yeah? Everyone okay with that? Okay. Now, so that one there is evaluating. So if weight is equivalent to 45, if weight is not 45, all right? So remember, it's these two to use if you're checking. Similarly, if you're using a string, okay? If you're using a string, what should you use when you're checking to see if two strings are equal? You use equals, okay? So you got that string, my string is equal to hello, and string my string 2 is equal to new string hello. So we can say if my string dot equals my string 2, this way, so two strings are the same. Ta-da! Okay, so all of the equals methods of every method that's going to be ever created is going to return true or false, which means you can use any equals method of any class in an if statement. Okay, you can also use them in loops. So put it in here. Any equals method of any object ever created will return a boolean. So any equals method of any object can be used directly in an if statement. So anything that requires a boolean can use an equals method. Okay. Now I'm going to do something here and it's going to result in an error. Right, so I go if. I'll just tell you. So I have an if statement here and I've got the curly bracket. So I'm going to put something in here. So I'm going to say weight equals 45. I get an error. Why is that giving me an error?
It's actually 45 for it's actually a number and this is a boolean.
You're assigning it, you're not.
Yeah, I'm assigning it, okay? It's not a boolean, okay? That is, what that's saying is if. Now it has to be true or false. So you're saying if 45. Has no clue what that is, okay? So if 45, so that doesn't work, alright? So that doesn't work. But this does, okay, because that's checking, okay. This does not work, so this does not compile because weight equal to 45 is not a boolean, okay, because weight is not a boolean. This is in effect if 45, which is rubbish, okay. It has to be a boolean, so this will not compile. If you try to put something in there that's not a boolean, you're going to get an error. Now there's always at a very minimum 2 questions that ask that exact thing in the exam, so minimum 2 questions. If you know that, you've got 2 questions straight away, and they always ask this.
How many questions do you need the overall?
Well, you get 70 questions.
Yeah.
So you have to get 60. It's between 60 and 64. So we'll assume the pass rate's going to be 64. So that's what
I'm interested. What is there? Is that scoped to the brackets?
Sorry.
Is it reassigned it to value 45? Is that scoped to the brackets there?
No. Say that again now.
See the weight equals 45.
If well,
So you're assigning 45 to weight.
yeah.
Is it only scoped to those brackets?
Well, if you could do it, it would be on the scope to them, yeah. But you can't do it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Now what Jason's saying there, if you could do that, alright? No, actually be available from that point onwards. Sorry, it's incorrect. Because weight is already created. If it wasn't created, it'd only be available inside there.
Oh, no, but I thought it might be.
It's going to have the.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so it does not work. Right. Now, so you can check if something is null. Now, there is other ways of checking for null, but this is one of the ways you can do it. So, if I go dog spot, okay, spot is equal to null. Now, here's the question. Is there anything we could do in Java? So, you might say, why would I ever want to do that? Why would I make an object to be null? Is there any place in Java where that happens automatically?
If you don't assign something,
Yeah. So that happens automatically if I do this. See our dog class here. Okay. Now inside the dog class, each dog is going to have a partner. Okay. Now, if you don't assign a value, you have an object, and one of its attributes is another object. All right. String name. Okay. So we can see we have dog partner and string name. I haven't assigned a value to name. I haven't assigned a value to partner. So they're both given the default value of null. Okay? So you usually need to have some sort of check to make sure that this hasn't happened. Okay? So it's very easy to have loads of null objects. Right? Very easy. So what you need to do, you need to check for null. So what you can do is if spot. So this is one circumstance when you would use the equivalence symbol. Now there is other ways of doing it, but they're a bit more complicated. There is methods that will check to see if an object is null or not. But this is one way. So you go if spot is null. Now we've done something like this already. Remember the equals methods? Remember those? Remember the equals methods we were doing last week? The first thing we had to check to see is was the object null when we use something like this. Okay, so if spot is null, so you can check if something is null. It either is null or it isn't null. You can't say greater than or less than null. You can't say less than or equal to null. It can either be null or not null. So you can use this syntax or you can use this syntax, whichever you want to use. It is totally up to you. Okay, so if it's not null,
when returned.
it's fine. Okay, if it is null, I'm going to assign a new dog to spot. Okay, so see what I'm doing there? If it is null, it's going to assign a dog to spot. Do you understand that? Right, so at this point here, spot is null. So then I check if spot is null. So in effect, if spot is only a name, not a dog. So what it does is it assigns a dog to this name. Yeah?
But it's only inside if.
No. Right, so we'll just have a little toString method here for our dog. No, I'll go back to here. Now, so at this point here, this is a null object. All right, this is a null object. Right, so at this point here, it's a null object. Now, it's not an error to print out a null object. Fine, okay? If you do something with a null object, then you get what's called a null pointer exception. Because this is a null object, it doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a partner. So this is fine. Okay. This one here, spot dot age. It's not age, name. Now, this is a null object. A null object has no name, it has no partner. Because it doesn't exist, it's only a name. So that generates what's called a null pointer exception. Okay, a null pointer exception is when you're attempting to do something with a null object, and a null object is nothing. A null object doesn't have a name. A null object doesn't have a partner. Yes? Because at this point here, so this is an address of where a dog will live. Okay, so it's going to be an address of where a dog will live. The dog that lives here, the value that I put in here is null, which is the default value for all objects. It doesn't contain anything inside it, really. It's just a placeholder. Alright? It's just reserving its spot. Okay? So, that is not a dog. That is a null object. Okay? A null object has no properties. A null object has no attributes. So if you try to get attributes of a null object, you're going to get a null pointer exception. Okay? But that's neither here nor there. So at this point, we only have the name of the dog. We don't have an actual dog object. If I go here, so I comment out this guy. Now, so this generates a null pointer exception. Okay, comment. It generates a null pointer exception as spot is a null object and a null object has no attributes. Okay? Only a real dog object has a name.
Sorry, but why new dog is not private? Because he created in curly bracket in if statement.
Oh no, it's not private. I'll show you in a minute now. Right? I will show you in a minute. So, now I come down, so here we can't access the name of the dog because there is no dog there. It's only the name of the dog. That's all it is. Okay? A reference is only a name. That's it. Okay? Now I'll go along here. If spot is null, spot is equal to new dog. I can then come along here. There we are. Now we can access the name of the dog. We haven't given the dog a name. Alright? And so it's an object, so it's going to be given the default value of null. But the dog itself is not null. The name of the dog is null. The dog's partner is null. But the dog itself is not null. Because, now if I created, so I created spot outside of these local, now this is not if statements, but it's no harm to do it. Alright? So I created spot outside here. Alright? That means that that reference is available everywhere from this point forward inside this method ex1. Does everyone understand that? Okay? So spot is available everywhere inside ex1 from this point forward. Now if I change what spot relates to anywhere inside ex1 from this point, it's going to be changed everywhere from that point onwards. So what I mean by that is, so here, spot is an existing variable, okay, that was created up here, outside the brackets. We assign a new dog to it. that means that that new dog is available everywhere from that point forward as well.
But sorry, it's working only on objects. If we will have int age 5
Yeah,
here
right.
and in
Now-
statement we will change up in age equal like
No,
12, is it will change or not?
No. Well, all will of course change. So if I have an int, okay. So if I have int num is equal to 25, okay. If I go num is equal to 1000, num has now changed to 1000 everywhere. Okay. Now what's not available is if I'm inside the curly brackets, if I go double dnum is equal to 3.34.56. That's only available inside the if curly bracket. Okay, so that is only available from here to here. Okay, it's not available outside the curly brackets. So if I go here, get an error.
So actually, in curly brackets, if we will be changing, we can only change, and it will change everywhere, yes? But we,
As long as-
it will be only...
As long as that variable exists outside the curly brackets. If that variable exists outside the curly brackets, then if I change it inside the curly brackets, it's changed everywhere from that point forward. If the variable does not exist, as in this guy here, you can't
like
access
private.
it.
It's like private for that curly bracket.
No, because private is available everywhere within the class. Okay? This is local variable. A private variable is available everywhere within that class. Okay? A local variable is a variable only available within the curly brackets. Okay, so that's the difference between private. So private is available everywhere inside that class. Public is available on all classes. Protected, it's available in the same package or in a derived class. Okay, so if you have dog extends animal, any protected variable is also available in the dog class. And then you have default, which is package level access. If you're in the same package, you can access those variables. Local variables are all about curly brackets. Okay, it's not the fact that it's an if statement that's making this local, it's the curly brackets that's making it local. Any questions on that? If you just think it through, it makes logical sense, but you have to follow the rabbit down the rabbit hole. Might lead you to some funny places, but as long as you follow it logically, this doesn't.
You don't even need the if statement there at all.
No.
Because it's null anyway from the start.
Yeah. So if I did, just to let you know, so I'm going to put in a couple of comments here. Okay. So here we assign a dog to the null reference, the null dog reference spot. Okay. That means that from this point onwards, everywhere in ex1 method, spot will refer to this dog. Okay? A real dog, not a null dog. A real, honest to goodness dog. Okay? Similarly, num int num was created outside the curly brackets. Okay? Which means it's available inside these curly brackets, and it also means that when we change it here, it will be changed everywhere from this point onwards in the EX1 method. Now, this guy here, this is a local variable that is local to the curly brackets of this if statement. It will not be available outside of the curly brackets. So now we can access Spot's name. Now Spot has a name. He no longer is null. Now the name is still null, but the dog itself is not null. Okay, so Spot himself is no longer null, but his name is, as we have not assigned a name Spot. Okay, so there's no error here. Can't access dnum because it's local. So it was created inside of the if statement. Okay, it was created inside the if statement. Now to make things really good, now, so Java's got a set rule, it's grand. If you use something like PHP, it's the exact opposite rule. And as far as I know, PHP is the only programming language that does that. Why they do that, I don't know. Alright, but this is a proper rule. Okay. So if you create something inside curly brackets, it's only available inside those curly brackets as a rule.
So the C# don't do this.
Oh no, C# does. C# is the same as this. Okay? PHP doesn't, but that doesn't matter. Okay? So, can't access that. Now, when you're checking stuff, you can also do something like this. So we go weight is equal to 5. So we can do sorts of compound statements. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to put a bracket inside it and I go weight plus equals 40. Now, still an error, but if I say if that's greater than 60. So that's saying if whatever the weight is, what does that dude do? That dude adds 40 into whatever weight does. So that is the same as weight is equal to weight plus 40. That's going to be 40 plus 5. It's going to be 45. 45 is not greater than 60. It's not going to enter. Yes? So as long as you can put whatever programming logic you want inside there, as long as its result is going to be a boolean, you can put anything in there. Okay? You can put in method calls. Method calls that are calling other methods, that are checking dates, that are checking the right format, so on and so forth. As long as the end result of it is a boolean, you can put anything in there. Okay? Now I need to save that. So this will, XYSO will not print out.
So here is 45 is greater than 60.
Sorry?
It will take 45 is greater than 60.
It won't. Okay? Because
Weight is 5. So So 5 plus 14.
Yeah, 45. It won't print out. So I'm saying that what I'll do is we will print it out. Okay, so we'll say 30, and we'll say we'll print out because 45 is greater than 30. Okay, so that will print out. Fine, but if I put in any number greater than 45, it won't print out. Okay, so I'll put in 30. Now, so you can check. So as long as this produces a boolean, you can put whatever you want in there in this statement, as long as that produces a boolean. So you can have something like this. So if you have a boolean itself, so I'm going to create a boolean. I'm going to call it boolean test is equal to true. So if I go if test okay, now so an if statement doesn't care how it's generated. All it cares about is that this evaluates to true or false, and test is a boolean. So all you have to say is if test. Okay, so an if statement can check a boolean directly. Okay, so we can do it that way, or you can also do this. Both of those are correct. Both of them. Boolean is true. Boolean true again. Okay, as long as whatever is in the opening and closing braces evaluates to a true or false, then we're fine. Okay, so if you're checking a boolean, you don't have to put in that. You can if you want. That's the one that's more usually used. Okay, so if you see something like that, you know that test has to be, and there's no compilation errors. That means test has to be a boolean that's either true or false. Any questions? No. So I'm going to do something. If I do this, so test is true. Yeah? Everyone okay with that? If I do something like this,
Change pattern.
yeah, hold on.
Oh.
So what's that do done?
Assigning
Then
false
assign
to
it to
test.
true.
It's assigning test to false. That means that'll never run. It'll always be this. Okay. Now that doesn't break the rule, by the way. Remember I said before we said if num is equal to 45. That breaks the rule because num was an int. Okay. This doesn't break the rule because what it's doing is it's assigning false to test. So all that this is if false, and it is false. So that's not done. Okay. At the end of the day, these dudes always read the following. They either be, doesn't matter what's in it, it'll either be if true or if false. That's what's been produced. Every if statement that's ever going to be created, it ultimately produces if true, if false. If true, it's going to go onto the first line. If it's false, it's going to go to the else or the else if.
Oh, sorry. If we assigning, what one you do like system out? This is true.
No, because I'm I'm showing you that you can't go to it. Okay, I'm just showing you can't go to it. Okay, so if test is false, now that's assigning a value to a boolean, which is not this. Okay, that's only checking a boolean. Okay, again, that also comes up in the exam every time.
No, you signed here.
Yeah.
You come up in there, no?
Nope, because as I've said, what that actually means then is if false. So it means that's not Ryan.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Will it be the same if you put the brackets? Another brackets test equals false, and then to check.
Say that again now.
Equals true.
Say that again now.
What put there if and another bracket. Just put another bracket.
Yeah.
And then after that, after brackets equals true, and then close brackets.
False brackets equal.
So hold on. I write it out here first. Sorry. So we go test equals
False.
false. Yeah.
Close brackets
Yeah.
equals true.
uh,
Will it be the same?
hold on. Let me just have a look. See, sure, because we want to find out. So I'm going to put that. So it's going to sign. So that is going to become then, that's false. And false is not the same as true.
But it's working. You can put this.
No, I mean.
Yeah. Oh, no. Of course it works.
Longer way of writing that.
Yeah, it is. So it should still go test as false. Yeah.
Like you said, test equal false, and now we like, is it equal
Yeah.
true? No.
Now, believe it or not, there is circumstances when you need to do stuff like that. Okay? There is going to be circumstances when you're going to need to do stuff like that. Or you're going to come across methods that are doing something like that. You have to be able to read it. Now, you might be doing something like that yourself, but you are going to come across code, or you are going to come across methods. It's going to ask you to do something like that. You have to be able to read it. So, you might necessarily have to or want to develop code like that, but you have to be able to read that. Okay? Because what you're saying there basically is, so that assigns false to test. Okay? So that means test is false. So then it's checking to see, is test, is it true? No, it's not. It's false. So it goes to test is false. It's hard to believe how 3 little words cause so much issues. Okay? So just because it's a small piece of code doesn't mean it's a difficult, doesn't mean it's an easy piece of code. Sometimes 50 lines is a lot easier than 1 line. Sometimes. Okay?
It is the biggest word in the dictionary, or the most important one.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. So, and as I just said there, long code isn't necessarily bad code. Short code isn't necessarily good code either. Alright? Short code with no comments in it is bad code because you haven't a clue what's happening. Right? And you could be literally looking at it for years. That's not exaggerating. You could be looking at a couple of lines of code for years. Imagine that. Jesus, what a boring job. That's what Java 3 is, looking at 4 lines of code for 6 months.
No, it can be. It's actually.
Because they could be calling a method, you have no idea what the method is, you have no idea what variables it takes, you have no idea what it returns, you have no idea where it's coming from, you have no idea what it actually does.
You mean like a few lines of code in examples, and this can be in another like classes?
You could have 5 lines of code, And in the 5 lines of code, there could be a method that's calling another method that's calling a enum that has inside it a abstract class, which has inside it a generic, which has inside it a lambda, which has inside it a null date. And you have to dig down to find out what all that shit means. You have to understand it, number one. And number two, you'd have to find what's wrong with it. So it's not just the 5 lines of code, it's what's behind it. So, and if it's not commented, it's going to take a long time to figure it out. Alright? So, now, so, what's this doing? This is, so I might as well leave this here. So this is assigning false to test, then checking if test is true, which it's not. So this evaluates if false. Okay, so that's a false. This is false, so this prints out. Okay. So you can do, as I said, you can do anything inside an if statement. As long as it evaluates to a boolean, you can do anything inside it. Anything. Okay? You're not limited. So any code that at the very end of it produces a true or false, you can put in here. If you have a big complicated method that's comparing 4,000 or 5,000 different objects to each other, and if there's more than 1,000 of those objects with the same name, it returns true, you can put that method in an if statement. Okay? Or you can do some sort of simple calculation. So if I have two numbers, int num1 is equal to 10, num2 is equal to 50. So I go if num1 plus num2 is greater than 50. Now you can see I have an error there, okay, because num1 and num2 evaluates to a boolean. However, if you compare it against, or sorry, evaluates to an int. However, if you do a comparison, that's fine. So if num1 plus num2 is greater than 50, print it off, number greater than 50. Okay, now I'm not even bothering with anything else. So that's end of EX1. Yeah, go on. I'll just pause the recording. Okay, so start again. So static void ex2. Now, this is another short one. So I go int, start recording again. So the static void ex2, int age is equal to 18. Now, you can do something like this. Okay. Now, as I said, you can put anything inside an if statement. Okay, as long as it evaluates to boolean. Now, if you don't put a body in an if statement, you don't absolutely positively have to put a body in an if statement. Okay. Now, why would you ever want to do that? You want to do something. If some condition is true, something will happen inside here. Okay. If the condition is true, something's going to happen, and it's still going to return either true or false. All right. So you don't have to have a body in an if statement. That's the first thing. Okay. If you don't, you have to put a semicolon after the closing braces. All right. So let's say here. You don't have to have a body after an if statement. However, if you don't, you must have a semicolon after the closing braces.
But sorry, how to call seesaw?
Sorry?
In this case, we cannot see like it's true or not. You can put it away.
Well, right. Now, the only reason I'm putting in sys out is so we can see what's happening. Right? You don't have to do sys out for everything, number one.
No, but let's say if you want to see what happened.
Oh, in that case, you could, but what you'd have to do is you'd have to put in some sort of print statement inside there. Okay.
Before semicolon.
It have to be inside here. Okay. So everything would have to be inside here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now that still has to return true or false. So as long as it returns true or false, you can have a print statement inside there. You can have a method inside there that returns true or false, and inside the method there could be loads of print statements. Okay. So as long as that returns true or false, you can do that. All right.
How can you use that? Does it mean anything? Does it just
In that situation, it doesn't mean anything. No. No. But
Like it might well not be there at the moment, but it can't. You can hack them.
No. But it can have code inside it. Okay? That still can be producing something. Right?
How to access it? Like,
No, but how to access it mean this still has to execute. It has to check. So whatever's inside here is going to run. It is going to run. Right? Now if you want to create something that you want no record of, that's one way to do it. You can't reference it. Think about it. If you use this and you create something by using this, you have no way of referencing it. So this will allow you to create objects that are immediately gone. Why would you want to do that? That is incredibly secure. That is unhackable.
yes, but you cannot access it now. It's
No, but what I mean temporarily. So let's say you have a logon in here. You log on to the system. Okay? This causes a logon. There's no record of that logon.
so it's good for hackers as well.
No. It's unhackable. That can't be hacked. There's no record of it.
No, but can hacker make like this to not see?
Oh, it disappears. Yeah,
It's actually
yeah, because that disappears. Whatever happens in there, it's instantly made. You can't reference it. So that means it's liable for garbage collection, which means it's not accessible. So whatever happened inside here, it has happened, but you have no way to reference it.
But actually, it can happen true or false. That's it. Nothing else.
No, but what I'm saying is code can be executed inside here. There could be, for instance, right, I'll show you an example. Okay, I quickly create a method. I'm going to create a static method. Static boolean return me. And inside this method I'm going to have a couple of, this is so return first line code, second line of code, third line code, and we're going to return true. Now we could have some sort of calculation going on there that depending on what happens here is going to return true or false, right? So I'm going to put inside here, I'm going to go return me. Now this is static void ex2. So yep. First line of code, second line of code, third line of code. So it is printed off 3 lines of code. However, there's no physical record of that happening. Or even something like this. I create myself int num is equal to 56, dog spot is equal to new dog. So I've created an int, I've created a dog, I've created a string, invisible. Okay, so I've created an int, I've created a dog, I've created a string. Alright, all by this dude here. However, as soon as they're created, they're no longer accessible. And those objects could be doing anything. They could be storing your logon. They could be logging you on. So think of it, if you wanted to build a method that would enter in your username and your password automatically into some field, okay, and then it's no longer accessible, it's gone. That's how you do it. It's unhackable, it's unbreakable, it's the most secure thing there is, because as soon as you create it, it's gone. Now, as soon as you create it, it does things, okay? but there's no record of it doing it. Alright? So you can imagine a situation where we're inside here, it gets access to your username, it gets access to your password, and it enters that username and password for your email. Right? So it enters my name, Noel, enters my password. However, as soon as it finishes, there's no record of those. There's no way a hacker can get Noel and password. That's what you'd use that for. It's unhackable. It's ultra secure. Okay? It seems kind of weird, but it is. It exists while it's running, but as soon as it stops running, it's gone. Okay? So it's like a shooting star, burns up in the atmosphere. It does exist while it's running, but as soon as it stops running, all the data contained within it, and anything that happens within it, is gone. For instance, let me just show you here. I will go to this fella here. So here's my browser. And let me see, what do I log into fairly regularly? This. Okay, so I sign in. So that's my nephew. He does nothing anyway. So I'm going to log into Michael's email address. Okay, it's all Fortnite bullshit anyway. Yes, I don't know why his game's installed on my machine, so he doesn't use it. Okay, so I know there's nothing in his email. Actually, I won't. Okay, that's not such a good idea. So I'm going to my one. All right. Now I have a thing here called LastPass, which stores all my emails. Now it doesn't actually store them. What it does is I made sure of this before I got it. This was recommended by me by used to work in Symantec. They recommended to use this.
How is it LastPass?
LastPass. Okay, they're the ones that recommended to me because this is the only one that's ultra secure. That's it. Okay, so enter in that. Then I enter in next, and there's my password entered. How that operates is that letter. That's basically how it operates. There's an if statement that's calling a method, and this method. Remember what I said before that passwords aren't stored on a database. What's stored is a really long number, and then from that number it gets the password. So all the encryption is done inside, all the decryption is done inside a method like that. So it's also private to make things even better. Okay, it's a private method, which is kind of unbreakable anyway, and it's an if statement. Okay, so that's what you'd use that for. It's unbreakable. That's what it's for. Okay? Any questions on that? It's something simple, but it's very powerful. Is that okay? So,
But actually, it's useless is it only if returning something, like not like.
no, but it doesn't matter whether it returns true or false.
No,
because
I mean what if return B, like it's getting something from somewhere.
Yeah, well, it has to return true or false.
You know, like we showed before, like H more.
No, but that's not.
Useless.
Yeah, well, that's not going to work. So this has to be true or false. Now, it just returns the value true, or in this case.
So if it returns true, you can go true. If false, so it's wrong password or something like it.
You can, yeah. So you can be generating inside here. So true could be generated. So if true is generated inside here, you've got the right username, the right passwords. It logs you in. Okay, and it returns true. Now it doesn't do anything with that return, but you're logged in at this stage. But there's no record of your username and your password.
If you class or class says dot return, does that work?
Class dot return me.
Yeah.
Not if you make it, not if that's enough. I made it a static because we're inside a static.
Yeah.
Okay? If I made it, so take out that guy.
Yeah.
Right? But make it private. You can only access that if it's a instance of the class that's accessing it. Okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
And one way of stopping anything from logging this is to make the whole class private. If you have the class private, then it's sealed up tight in a drum, nothing can get in, nothing can get out. You can have a static method that does all sorts of shit, alright? But this, so an if statement like that, why would you use it? It's secure. By Jesus, is it secure? Simple, but if done correctly, it's unhackable.
But when that was static, you could do that.
Yeah.
Somewhere else in
Yeah. Because this is static. So you can access it. The only reason I made it static is so I can access inside this static method here. Okay? Is that okay there, one? Right. Now, that's why you'd use that. Now, so that's fine. However, if I have something like this, if true, which is fine, okay, that's fine. Or if I'll do it again, if return me, okay. Now, as soon as I put in an else, I have to put in some sort of statement after the if. See that? So if I do this, that's incorrect, okay, because you can only use this structure all by itself. So if you have a semicolon at the end of it, that means there can be no else's or nothing else. Which, as soon as you put in an else, you can't use the semicolon here. Does everyone understand that? As soon as you put in an else, you can't use the semicolon here. So use this. So as soon as you use a else or an else if, as soon as you use an else or an else if, you can no longer use a semicolon at the end of the if statement. You have to revert back to the normal type. Now you could have something like, so this does not work. Okay, so I'll comment it out. So if I do this, now I have to put something after the if. Okay, I have to put something after the if. Now you can do this. Right? So if you have an else, you either have to put some sort of statement or empty curly brackets. Okay? So if you have an else, you have to put something after the if. If you don't want anything to come after the if, you put in blank curly brackets. Okay? So I'll put in here. If you want nothing to appear, after an if, in an if-else statement, you have to put in empty curly brackets. You can't just put in nothing. That gives you an error. Okay? But that's fine. Would you do ever something like that? Some programmers do that. If that doesn't, it only wants to get information about when it's a false. Okay? Now, personally for me, I think you should always put something in here, because it shows that the if part is running. Put something in here, it shows that the else part is running. You'd see a lot of code online, they put nothing in here, or they put nothing in here, which is always a bad thing, because you're never 100% sure, did that run? Did that run? Right? So it's not hard to put in the print statement. You can comment out the print statement so it's in your in product, it's not going to be there. But put it in there and just comment it out and comment it in to make sure that it's running. Alright? You always never assume things are running. Never assume. That's what happened with Boeing, I'm sure. You know what they're playing? Software issue. Guarantee you something like that went wrong. Okay, they didn't test it properly.
Do you cover debugging?
Sorry?
Do you cover debugging?
No. No. Just had enough to this now. No. Debugging is just going through your code and looking for bugs. Okay? So I don't do that. Okay? There is debugging tools in this, mainly in Eclipse, something called Step Into and Step Out of. Step Into, yeah, Step Into. Okay. Huh? It is, yeah. It's a whole thing of itself. Okay. So that works fine. That doesn't work. As soon as you have an else or an else if, you have to put in something after the if. Be it empty brackets or a print statement with nothing. If you don't want nothing, you just put in empty curly brackets. Okay? Now I've already said you can't put any code in between the if, the else, and the else if. Okay? So I'll try to do this. Right? Can't do that. So cannot put code in here. And else ifs, you can have many else ifs if you want. But you can't put code in between the else ifs. Yes? You can't put code between the else's. Now, that's all we're going to do with EX2. So I'm going to go beneath static boolean return me, and we're going to go static void EX3. Now, so comment. Copy that. Okay, static void EX3. So, God bless you. If no curly brackets. Now this applies to if statements. This applies to for loops, while loops, do while loops, anything that has curly brackets, not methods. Okay, so this applies to loops. This applies to if statements. Okay, so if you have no curly brackets, the body of your if statement, I'm going to say this one. Body of your if, else, and else if can only have one line of code. So I'm going to create, name is going to be lion. So this is what you should not do. That's not the one you should use. Okay, so should not use this.
What is not good here?
Sorry?
What is not good here?
If name is lion, because if I went this way, I did this. Now they are the same spelling, same case and everything. Yet if I did this, that's going to be false. Okay, because if you use new keyword, it's not placed in the pool. All right, that's checking the pool. So they're not the same object. We can run it to prove it. False. Okay. Now, so what you use instead is equals name dot equals name 2.
Yeah, so yeah, different like now remove it. If name equal lion, it's actually it should be true. It's not.
I don't go using them. Don't use equal. There are circumstances that won't be true. I can't think of what the circumstances are, but there is a circumstance that won't be true. Don't. It's my advice. Okay. If you want to find out if two objects are equal, always use equals with it. Don't use that tool. Right. So use equals instead. So if I go if name that equals. Now there is one called equals ignore case. So you can put in capital Lion or lowercase lion. All it checks is the spelling. Okay, if you want to, you might as well use that. And I'll go lion. And I only have one line of code, so I'm not going to put in the curly bracket this time. So I am a line, feed me meat. And then I go else if name dot equals, and again I go equals ignore case. I'm going to say HORSE. So, oops, sorry about that. Close bracket, 1 line. I am a horse, feed me hay. And then else. Now we've more than one line of code in the else, so we need to put in the curly bracket. I'm going to say feed me cabbages. So this is a very small zoo. It's only got 3 animals in it. It's got a lion, a horse, and a hippo. And I'm going to say, I assume this animal is a hippo. So here you can see one line of code. Don't have to have curly brackets. This one here, one line of code. Don't have to have curly brackets. And this one here, more than one line of code, need curly brackets. Now, if I come along here, if name equals ignore case, and if I put, now this is why probably brackets are a better idea than not having them. Alright? If I do this, right, so bring up my pen. Now, I have my 2 lines of code. Alright, And we're getting the error here. Alright, it doesn't tell you the error is here. That's what where the error is here. You should have curly brackets at the beginning and the end.
So
So
like since like use always curly brackets.
yeah, probably is, yeah. Okay. Maybe when you get a little bit more used to coding. But for me, I think it's always a no-brainer. Yeah? Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. Now, a lot of the time, you'll see an awful lot, on Stack Exchange in particular, you'll see something like this, if check, and then they just have a line of code. And then the else, if, and they have a line of code. A lot of the time, it's very hard to follow. Alright, if you have brackets, it's much easier to follow. Alright, now, if you find later on as you're doing it, I don't want to use brackets anymore, then fine.
But it's actually like much easier brackets, this curly bracket, because actually you don't have error like this.
Yeah, well, that error is actually that can be difficult enough to spot, right? I mean, if you look at that, if you just look at where the red line is there, oh, there's something wrong with this.
And it looks good.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That line of code is fine.
Of course, probably now I would add curly brackets after horse to try to fix this.
Yeah, yeah. So you might even try now. This is easy enough code. It could be a lot more complex than that. All right. You can even get circumstances where you have a load of if else's in the line. It might be the last one that's producing the error. It's actually the if part that's causing the error. Right? It'll say that this is causing the error, and it could be a couple hundred lines long. So don't be over reliant on the error, because it won't give you, might give you, in actual fact, as you go along, it most definitely won't give you what's wrong with it. Alright? So, let's see, what does it say? Why isn't an error? Syntax, error on token, delete this token. Now, what that means is, if I deleted the else there, this is a brand new if statement. Okay, then it would work. Because what you'd have is an if statement that this is just an ordinary statement. This is an if statement and this else belongs to it. So it'll give you, if you took what it suggested there, it'll make a balls of your code. It'll run, but it's not what you wanted to do. Alright? So as well, make sure that if the suggestion it gives you, make sure it's the right suggestion. Alright? So
you have to use that instead. You could the whole pile of if statements.
Sorry?
You could the whole pile of if statements and no else at all.
you can, yeah. Oh yeah, you can, yeah. And they're just separate if statements. Yeah, nothing wrong with doing it. So this will not compile, so this is the last thing I'm going to do now today.
Can you replace like switch statement by if?
Oh yeah. You can replace switch statements. You can replace switch statements with if statements with switches. Anywhere you can use, not anywhere you can use ifs. Switch statements can only do certain things. Okay, switch statements can't do everything an if statement does. Okay, an if statement is more versatile. You can use it in more situations.
But in some cases it's good as well.
Oh yeah. Well, the number one place that switch statements are useful for is creating the likes of this, creating the actual GUI, because the switch statement then, your switch statement is going to look like that. That's what your switch statement is going to look like. So your case toggle comment, case block comment, case generate element comment, so on and so forth. So anything that gives you options, it actually looks physically like it. So, but an if statement is more versatile. I'm showing you that. I'm going to tomorrow, it's been Monday. Okay? So, see you tomorrow, obviously. So I will finish that now. So chill out for a couple of minutes there. Right, so we're starting recording. So in the second part of the if statements. So, static void ex3, turn on my pen. So, pen. Alright. So string name is equal to line, string name 2 is equal to new string line. Now there are two different strings, so you shouldn't use equals equals. All that asks is the same object. These are not the same object because this line is placed in the pool. This line is not. Whenever you use new keyword, it's not placed in the pool. It also doesn't check the pool, so that will be false. So you should always use equals instead of equivalents. Okay. Now, and so then we did a if statement. Now, if you have only one line of code, all right, you don't have to put curly brackets after an if statement. Now, personally, I prefer to put curly brackets because it makes everything easier to read. All right. But if you've only one line after an if statement, you don't have to put curly brackets. The same rule applies for loops. Ifs and loops. Okay, so if you've only one line of code, you don't have to put in curly brackets. Personally, I prefer to put in the curly brackets. Okay, it just makes things easier to read. So name equals ignore case. Now that's just another form of equals that ignores the case. Oh, sorry, I dropped back this time. Sorry about that. No, sorry, no, sorry. You don't, no need to. Won't need to this evening and turn it off. Oh, okay, thanks very much. Okay. So equals ignore case, so that's going to ignore what the case is, doesn't matter. Alright? So if equals lines, go to I'm alive, free me meat. Similar for an else if you have only one line of code, you don't have to put in curly brackets. Now else here we've got more than one line of code, so you have to put in curly brackets when you've got more than one line of code. Okay? Now I am going to do another one here. Show you. So we have a name already defined, so we're going to say name is equal to ostrich. Now, if I do something like this, if name dot equals the word ostrich, now, so we can only put in, I'm not going to put in curly brackets, that means we can only put in one line of code. Alright? Now, if I do this, and I just go print off, oops. So if it's an ostrich, it's going to do all this. Now, so remember what I said, if you've no curly brackets after the if statement, you can only put in one line of code. However, this seems to be multiple lines of code and still have been allowed. Now, what's actually happening there is that a loop is treated as one line of code. Okay? All of that is treated as one line of code. So that is legal. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Alright? So, for loop, so put in here. If you have no curly brackets after an if statement, you can only have one line of code. However, the whole loop, the whole for loop, is treated as one line of code. Okay? the if statement will treat a loop, another if statement, a switch statement, something we won't be using, an anonymous inner class, something called a lambda, which we'll be using as a single line code. Okay, so all of that is treated as a single line of code. Another if statement would be considered a single line of code, and that if statement could have if statements inside it. That if statement could have curly brackets inside it. But all of this guy is treated as one line of code. Does everyone understand that?
Because of brackets?
No, because it is only it's one.
Oh no, yeah, because of the brackets and because the other statements.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if I didn't have brackets here, if I took out the brackets here, all right, what you have is you have an if statement that contains a for loop that contains that line. That is not in the if. That is not in the if statement. That is not in the for loop. That's just a statement all by itself. See that? Now you should be able to see there that brackets make things a lot easier. So what you have there, now that's a typical exam question there, by the way. So you have an if statement. What belongs to the if statement? The for loop. What belongs to the for loop? That line. This line doesn't belong to either the if statement or the for loop. It's just a line of code all by itself. Okay. So for me personally, it's much easier for the curly bracket there, curly bracket there. So that clearly shows you everything inside those curly brackets belongs to the if statement. And you can put a curly bracket here and a curly bracket here. That shows you that this belongs to the for loop. Now I'm not going to put curly brackets, but I think it's easier for curly bracket there and curly bracket there, and you put a little statement here that says end of if statement. Okay, it would make it a lot easier to read. Okay, any questions on that? Come on, you want to ask one?
Yeah, so that second line there, this one.
Which one?
B.
This one? Well,
If you curly brackets gone.
right, so I'll take out the curly brackets. So I'm going to take out the curly brackets. Now, so the name is ostrich. Okay. And I'm just going to morning wind. That's fine. Right.
Minutes on form.
That's fine. Stuff happens. Okay, so. Okay, that's the wrong one that's running. This is EX3. Okay. What's wrong here? Hold on a second. What's wrong? Got the wrong main open. Again. Right. So, if name equals ostrich, goes into the for loop, it prints off I is my number. So it's going to print off 0 is my number, 1 is my number, 2 is my number, 3 is my number. Okay, that's part of the for loop. This is just going to print off itself once. Okay, because that's not part of anything. Okay, now if we wasn't an ostrich, so if I change this to swan, So it doesn't print. It doesn't go into the if statement. So that means it doesn't go into the for loop. It just prints off, print me. Okay, because it's not part of the for loop. If it's not part of the for loop, sorry, it's not part of the if statement. Okay, and it's not part of the for loop inside the if statement. Okay, so curly brackets. Yes, you can do without them if you've just one line of code, but it makes your code a hell of a lot easier to operate. Okay, it makes your code much more understandable. All right. Now I'm not going to put a curly bracket in here, and just to show you that you can do it. All right. So curly brackets, and they're frequently left out, but I don't think it makes your code less readable. I think it makes it more readable if you leave them in. Okay, but it's up to yourself. It's just a matter of preference. So, any questions about that? Nope. Okay. So I'm not even going to bother putting in an else. Okay. So if name equals ostrich, well, actually I will. Else, I'm going to put in curly brackets for this one. I'm going to put in a for loop for int j is equal to 0, j is less than 6, j plus plus. Right inside that, not an ostrich. And it's going to print off the number. Number here is plus I. Okay, so that's the end of your, this is the else. This is end of else. This is end of for loop. If you're in any doubt of where your for loop or your else statement finishes, put in a comment. Alright? No one's going to crucify you for that. It's just, you know, if you have a lot of brackets, you're unsure where stuff starts, where it finishes. If you're not too sure where it finishes, click on the opening curly bracket. You'll have a square that comes around your closing curly bracket. Similar for the else. There. Okay. Now, personally, I think that is easier to read than that. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now I'm getting an error.
I want to put J. Number here is plus J.
J, that's it too. Thanks, Seth. Listen. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, so there we are. Not an ostrich. So on and so forth goes on here. Number is 2. So on and so forth. Now, so this is going to be end of ex3 here. And then we got static void ex4. And we're going to go to main examples at ex4. Now, so we're going to be doing, these guys are going to be nested ifs. So what are nested if statements? They're if statements within any statement. So I'm going to do something like this. So I'm going to do, we're showing you scores you gotten some sort of test. So someone got a score of 456. Okay. In score is equal to 456. So if score is less than 400. So this only happens for scores that are less than 400. Inside of that, I'm going to say if score greater than 300, I'm going to print off less than 400 but greater than 300. Else, put in the curly brackets, less than 400 and less than 300. Okay, so this is the opening bracket of the if statement here. This is the closing of the if statement. Okay, so that's the opening and the closing. And inside the opening and closing, we have another if else. Okay, so this else belongs to this if. You understand that, yeah? So, and outside of those brackets, we're going to have a separate else. And this is going to say greater than 400. Okay. Now, so this else belongs to this if. Okay. And you can see all the bracketing is in a line. Right? All the bracketing is in a line, so you can see, and you can see this if else belongs to this if. Alright? This is, so when we're starting after thinking, what difference does indenting make? It makes a difference now. You should be able to see now how important indenting is. So you can clearly see that this if else belongs to this if, not this else. Yeah? Now, you'll find, by the way, as you go into more complicated Java, you actually won't use nested if statements that much, believe it or not. Alright? As you go into more complex Java, funnily enough, your code becomes, how can I describe it? Less complex. That's going to sound like a contradiction. The more complicated Java, the less complicated, it's more sophisticated Java. Okay, the less complex it looks. Alright, because what you end up with is, let's say, me dot you dot here dot now. You're going to have methods calling other methods, calling other variables, and calling all sorts of things. Okay, you'll end up with something like that. Okay, so you can change that. Me is a variable. It calls a method called now. It calls another method called eat. It calls another method called food, which calls another method called energy, which calls another, or that's a attribute of a class. All right, so you'll end up with something like that. All right, if a variable called me calls a method called now, which calls a method called eat, which calls a method called food, which uses an attribute called energy. Alright? You won't actually be using nested if statements that much, believe it or not. Okay? Now,
Sorry. Why not put it like, yes, I know, probably want to show was like,
Yeah.
If score less than 400 and more than 300.
I don't want to do that because I want to show you.
No, but it's possible, yeah.
Oh yeah, of
No,
course,
no,
of course, yeah, of course. As I said, there's more than one way to do it. Okay, this is just another way to do it. Okay. Yeah. So that's one nested if statement. Now we're going to try and do something similar, except without curly brackets. All right. So we're going to try and do something similar, except without curly brackets. And it's actually even difficult even to try and do it. So I'm going to, my score again is going to be 4, 5, 6. So you want to make sure you're outside. This is the end of else. Score is equal to 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to do the exact same, except this time I'm going to do it without curly brackets. Alright? So if I go if score is less than 400, I go, and I'm going to put them all on the same indent. If score is greater than 300, I go SYSO. I'm going to identify this as print less than 400 greater than 300, else less than 400 and greater than, oh no, sorry, less than 300, less than 300 and less than 300. Okay, and then I go else greater than 400. Now, that is exactly the same as the one above it, but it's much, much harder to read. Okay, this guy, all of this belongs to that if. Okay, this else belongs to that if as well. Okay, so that is much harder to read than that, and they're exactly the same. Okay, they are absolutely exactly the same. The only difference is the curly brackets, but that is much more difficult to read. Okay, it's very easy to think that somehow this, and this all belong to that, which is impossible. You can't have two else's belonging to an if. Alright, this else belongs to this if, this else belongs to this if.
You can have if, else, that's it.
Yeah, but you could have if, say it again now.
If, else, if.
Yeah, well, if you had if, else, if, that belongs to just the one stuff like if, else,
And
else if. You could, but that would mean
but
that.
does an else if belong to else?
No, hold on. No. So if you had if, else, and else if, you could. No, you can't have that. There's no way you can have that. Okay? Because if that was inside, you can't have an else by itself. Okay? And if the else It's something like that. Can't have that either because you can't have an else if by itself. Okay? So you can't have if, else, else if. You can't have if, else either. Okay? Doesn't matter if it's inside brackets or something like that, you can't have that. Hold on. You can have else if, else if, else. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. No, what isn't fine is this. So, if I have opening bracket and if I have a closing bracket here, because that else if is just all by itself. An else and an else if has to be accompanied by an if. Okay? You can't have an else if by itself, you can't have an else by itself. You can have an if by itself. Okay? Alright? So, just gonna put it here. Comment is this is exactly the same as the above nested if, but it has no curly brackets and no indentation. Okay, which makes this much harder to read than the above. Now, unfortunately, in the exam, they're going to give you something like that in the exam. Alright? So you have to be able to read that. Alright? Now, it's bad code. That is bad code. There's nothing wrong with the actual typing of it, or there's nothing wrong with the syntax of it. What's wrong with it is the layout. It's cat. Okay? So that is bad layout. That's one thing about the exam that isn't great. It does encourage bad habits. And that's one bad habit. Okay, that looks. Now Eclipse, you're lucky with the clips. Eclipse indents it all automatically for you. But as I said, you are going to be sometimes, if you get a job as software developer, you're going to be looking at code that's not in Eclipse. And it's also not going to be nicely formatted. It's going to look something like that. In actual fact, I can change this to something like this. Right, I'll paste this down here. So I have it. Now what I have there is it's all on the one line of code. Because everything else, so that is fine as well. Now that's impossible to make out, right? There isn't that many lines of code in it, but Jesus, that's nearly impossible to figure out. What's happening now? No, anyone who gives you in that sort of format now, you know. No, don't give it to them. But they will give it to you in this format, which is still difficult enough. Okay, that's sticky enough to make out. Okay, but all the machine sees is that. New lines and everything, that's just for us. Machine doesn't care about whether it's on a different line or whether it's all on one line. Okay, so put it here as well. This is also the exact same as the above, but even harder to read. Okay, so now you wouldn't be expected to read. I mean, if you ever get that out, don't know what you do. I mean, if you ever got something like that, I think the easiest way to figure it out is everywhere you see a semicolon, put it onto a new line for a start anyway. Okay, so I'd put the else part onto a new line. We try and break it down into chunks that are going to be more readable. Alright, so, but I'm just going to leave it that way. Show you that you can have code like this. Very hard to read, but there's nothing stopping from having it like that. Okay, now, so we're nearly finished with statements. So, next part is static void ex5. And these are ternary operators. Okay, now what are these guys? These are a simple if else, but using the question mark symbol, which is this guy. Instead of a if else. Right, so we're going to do a simple if else first, and then we're going to do the equivalent ternary operator. Alright, so I'm going to go int age is equal to 18. If age is greater than 18, so you are over 18. Now 18 is not greater than 18, so else you are under 18. So I'm going to go here to main. I'm going to go to example cx5. You're under 80. Okay, so what we're going to do instead is we're going to use what's called a ternary operator. Alright, so comment. So first thing is ternary operator, or construct, whatever they call it, has to be assigned to something. I'll explain that in a minute. So that's assigned to something. Okay. Now the first part of the ternary construct has to be evaluated to a boolean. So just like an if. Okay. Here it's going to be age greater than 18. Okay. Followed by a question mark. Followed by if true part. Followed by colons. Followed by false part. Now, if boolean is true, message is you are over 18. If boolean is false, message is you are under 18. So I'm going to say age 10. I'm going to pass a boolean message. So it's going to be assigned to message. Now we're going to do this. So we got msg is equal to. So if the age is greater than 18, message is going to be you are over 18, else you are under 18. Now, you have to have some sort of variable here on the left hand side. It can be a string, it can be a dog, it can be a cat, it can be an int, it can be anything you want it to be. Okay? This is the testing part. If age is greater than 18, okay, that's what the ternary operator does. Okay, that's basically just an if else. So if the age is greater than 18, what's message going to be? Message is going to be you are over 18. Okay, if age is not greater than 18, message is going to be you are under 18. So that variable can either be you are over 18 if it's true. If it's false, it's going to be you are under 18. Okay, so the variable type here has to match the variable types here. So this is a string, so it has to be a string has to be produced here. A string has to be produced here. If this was an int would have to be produced here, an int would have to be produced here. If this was a zebra, a certain type of zebra would have to be produced here, a certain type of zebra would have to be produced here. Does anyone have any questions on that? It's just a simple if else. And to prove that it works, I'm going to print off message. Oops. So message is plus message. Message is you are under 18. Okay. It'll only print you are over 18 if it's over 18. Any questions on that? No? Okay, we're going to do another one. So we are going to go, this is a billing system. Okay. So int bill is equal to 1200. Now, so what I want to say, if the bill is greater than 2000, they're going to get a discount of 25 euros. Otherwise, they're going to get a discount of 10 euros. I'll write that down here. So, if bill is greater than 2000, discount is 25 euros. If not, discount is 10. Write me a ternary operator for that. I want you to get me the discount figure. So if bill is greater than 2000, discount is 25 euros. If it's not greater than 2000, the discount is 10 euros. I just want you to print off the discount.
Same way?
Yeah, ternary operator, yeah. So I'm going to do int discount is equal to. So if the bill is greater than 2000, then the discount is 25, else the discount is 10. And if I want to get the final bill, our discount is plus discount, bill is discount, or sorry, bill minus discount. Sorry, it's greater than 2000. Sorry, it's greater than 2000. Okay, so we only have a 10% discount. If I change the bill to 2200, it gets 2175. Is everyone okay with that? Now, you can also do things like this. So what does this do? I'm going to write a bit, I'm going to do a ternary operation here, and I want you to tell me what it's doing. Okay, so I'm going to say bill. Right. What am I doing there?
Just illustration 1500.
Yeah. The bill is great.
So take 200 euro on the way.
Yeah.
Take 200 away from it. If not, you take 300.
Exactly. Okay. Just makes sense, but beside the point. Okay. So if the bill is greater than 1500, it's going to take 200 away from the bill. If it's not greater than 1500, you take 300, which wouldn't make sense at all. But, you know, the computer doesn't care. Alright. So what we're doing here is, now that's like an exam question as well. Alright. Because in real life, it's going to do the other way around. They're not asking you that question. They're asking you, what does that code do? What that code does is, if the bill is greater than 1500, 200 is taken off the bill. If it's less than 1500, 300 is taken off the bill. Alright? So that's the opposite to real life, but it's not asking about real life, it's just asking what's happening in the real, in the code. So what's happening here is, if the bill is greater than 100, then we take 200 off the bill. If less than 1500, we take 300 off the bill. Okay, and to prove that it works, bill is bill. Now, it doesn't matter what goes in here. Anything can go in here. Anything can go in here, as long as whatever goes in here produces an int. So it can be a method call. Okay, it can be creating an integer wrapper object. Alright, so anything can go in here as long as that anything produces an int. Similar here. Right, same for these guys up here. Anything can go in here as long as it's producing a what? An int. Similar up here. Anything can go in here Now, when I mean anything, we're usually talking about method calls, okay, or creating an object, or calling a static method. So, message is a string. So this guy here has to be a string. This guy here has to be a string. This is the Boolean part, testing. Age greater than 18, that'll always produce a Boolean. Whatever's here will have to produce a string. Whatever's here will have to produce a string. It's just a simple if else. Any questions on that? Okay. Terminal operators, grand, simple enough. Personally speaking, I prefer an if else. Alright? I just find if else is easier to read. Now, that is if statements finished. Okay? So, I'm going to stop that recording.